Hi everyone, it's Brandy speaking. I'll be presenting our webinar soon. We're starting in about 10 minutes time, so I just wanted to turn on my microphone to make sure it's working and to welcome those of you that are here a bit early. So I see 20 of you have already logged on. We're going to have a pretty large group today. I expect around maybe 150 people or so. So again, I'll be back in 10 minutes to get us underway. Okay, see you then. All right, welcome everybody to our webinar. We are going to officially get started here with CELPIP Get the Facts. Now I've got about 63 of you already online, which is wonderful. We're expecting a very large crew today of about 150 people at least, I would say. So just as we're getting started, I wanted to make sure everybody understands how the tech side of this GoToWebinar system works, in case you're new specifically. So your microphones at home are muted. And again, that's just because we have such a large group of people online. We can't all speak up at once, or otherwise none of us would hear anything, right? So if you do have a question or a comment that you'd like to share, you can type those ideas into the questions box, which is at the bottom section of the GoToWebinar control panel. And everything that you type in there today is very private. So I will be able to read what you say. And I have a colleague, Silver, who's also online with us today. She's going to be busy typing answers to your questions into that same text box. So she can see what you're writing as well, but nobody else will see it. So it's very, very private. I will also be asking you questions from time to time as we go. So I'm hoping that you can participate and share your ideas in that same questions box. Now, hopefully you'll hear my voice loudly and clearly. We hope that there aren't any technological issues, but if there are, you can certainly log out of the system and log right back in again using Chrome as your internet browser. That tends to work the smoothest with our GoToWebinar software. You might want to have a paper and pen nearby, okay, just in case you hear something really important for yourself and want to write it down. But you will receive an email in about 1 hour after we finish today. And that email is going to include a link to a survey so that you can give some feedback on the programs we offer. And also this exact webinar recording. So if you miss anything we talk about today, or if you somehow get called out into a meeting or an emergency at home happens and you can't finish the webinar, you can certainly go back and listen to this exact recording again once you receive the email that contains the recording link. Okay, so everybody should be safe there as well. And Rizwan, I just answered your question. So hopefully you heard what I just said. If not, Silver can type in an answer there. So allow me to introduce myself. My name is Brandy, and this is me here on your screen. I'm a content developer and an online instructor with Paragon Testing Enterprises. So Paragon is the company that administers the CELPIP test that you're all here to learn a little bit more about. So I've been teaching now for 22 years. I've taught just a variety of subjects and age levels. So I started off teaching elementary school way back in 1999, hard to believe. And since then, since I've moved out west here to Vancouver, I've worked mostly with adults. So for the last 12 years or so, I've been teaching English to adults right from the beginning literacy levels to high school completion, to some ESL colleges, as well as first year university. So I'm going to use my background in language teaching and my knowledge of this CELPIP test in order to best prepare you on how you can be successful. All right, so let's get started here. So preparing for the CELPIP is a process. We can't just do one day of studying and expect to be successful on test day. We are on step 1 here, which is the orange button on your screen. And presumably you're all here to learn a little bit more about what the CELPIP test is all about. So that's what this specific webinar will introduce you to. That's why we call it Get the Facts. It's an overview. We do have several other webinars and they are all free. And in total, you've got about 10 hours or even more now of the webinar content there. So after you've listened in today, you'll probably want to go back and look at some specific CELPIP webinars based on speaking tasks and on writing tasks and things like that. I'll let you know that we are in the process of developing a reading webinar that is brand new, and we are hoping to air it at the end of September. So that is exciting. And that, by the way, has come from all of your feedback. So those surveys that I mentioned earlier that test takers will fill in, a lot of those surveys asked us to start developing webinars for reading and listening. So we're listening to your feedback and we're putting that together just for you, so stay tuned. We also have a new YouTube channel, and I added that in there in orange print. You can see it says YouTube channel, and the name of that is CELPIP Official. So every Tuesday morning, every second Tuesday now at 9:30 a.m. Vancouver time, We're going to be sharing some more tips and strategies on how you can be successful on the CELPIP test. So as a matter of fact, just this morning, I delivered another new lesson on speaking task 8, talking about how to improve your descriptive language use and so on. So check out that webinar if you haven't already. You'll find lots of past episodes. We started recording right since the end of March, since the pandemic started. We wanted to put together new content that is different from the webinars that we regularly offer. So those of you who have seen our webinars several times will probably want to check out the CELPIP official channel for new material in speaking and writing so far. Okay, once you've done all of the free webinars, you also have access to 2 free tests, and you'll find those on the CELPIP.ca website. We call them the starter pack. So try your hand at taking a test once you understand how the test is formatted, and it'll really let you know where your own strengths and your own weaknesses lie. So that's going to help you prepare to take the test yourself. You'll know where to study for. Once you've done with all the free things, you're on to our paid materials. So when you go to the bookstore, this is the CELPIP Prep button, you're going to find a list of helpful study materials, and I'll go over that with you at the end of today's session. Once you've prepared as much as you're able and you're feeling confident and ready, it will be test day. So a lot of test centers in the world have reopened since COVID started, so that's good news. So we are currently very busy catching up on testing for those of us who had to wait due to cancellations because of the virus. Okay, so depending where you live in the world, I will say right now, your test center might not yet be open. We have to follow the directives of the World Health Organizations, but where we are able to, we have reopened testing centers, and those seatings are very full with lots of people getting their tests done. So we can cross our fingers that hopefully some testing center near you will be open soon enough as well with availability. So this is how we are going to spend our time together. We'll take another, say, hour and 20 minutes, I expect. I'll just introduce some basic facts about the CELPIP and why people would take the test. We're going to spend most of our time today talking about test information. So it's my job to let you know how the test is structured and formatted, and I'll also give you some study tips just to get you thinking. Okay, and again, at the end, I'll put aside, say, 3 or 4 minutes just to go over the prep materials and to wrap up with any last-minute strategies we think of together. Okay. All right, and Abel's asking about those sample tests. Yes, there are questions on writing and speaking, so you'll definitely want to check those sample tests out for sure. Now, CELPIP, by the way, it's kind of an odd name. It's not a real word. CELPIP simply stands for Canadian English Language Proficiency Index Program. That's just too long to remember, so we call it CELPIP for short. And as we know, it's a language proficiency test. Okay, the test itself is completely done on the computer, online. So even your speaking section, you're going to record your voice into your microphone that you'll be wearing, and that's how the entire test is completed. You never meet a human examiner face-to-face on the CELPIP test, which helps a lot of people that I've spoken to. They say they feel more comfortable that way, knowing that they don't have to face a native language speaker to be tested, right? All 4 of your language skills are going to be assessed. So we have speaking, writing, listening, and reading. All right, for the general test, there is a different version of the test that will just assess the listening and speaking. So be aware of that. The CELPIP itself is a functional language test. So what this means is it's going to assess your day-to-day language use. So this is the type of language that you'd be expected to use, say, at work or in the community or out with friends. All right, it is not an academic test. That would be a different test that Paragon offers, which is called the CALE. And the CALE academic test is specifically for people looking to study at a university level or who are pursuing careers that require a much higher command of the English language. So please understand that this CELPIP is designed for the day-to-day communication skills that we use, okay? It is 100% Canadian. We're proud of that. It was originally developed right here in Vancouver, where I live, at the University of British Columbia. So Paragon itself, the company that I work for and the company that administers this test, Paragon is a subsidiary of UBC. It's sort of a division, if you will, of the University of British Columbia. And the CELPIP test is one of 2 tests that is designated by the Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship Canada. So the IRCC will accept the score on your CELPIP for either your permanent residency status or for your Canadian citizenship. So those are the 2 reasons really why you would take the CELPIP test. So on the screen, I want to make sure that everybody is taking the right test. So the one up top, the orange one, is called the general test because it assesses all 4 components of language. So listening, reading, writing, and speaking. And as a result, it's the longer test. It takes about 3 hours to complete. It's done in one sitting from start to finish. The test listed at the bottom in green is called the LS test. This is listening, speaking only. That's what the LS stands for. And you would take this one if you were pursuing your Canadian citizenship. Okay, and that's why this test is only offered in Canada, because you have to have lived as a permanent resident for several years in Canada before you're allowed to apply for the Canadian citizenship. So it makes sense to only then test the LS in Canada only. Because this test is only assessing those 2 areas, it's much shorter. So it's completed in 1 hour and in one sitting as well. Okay, so the general test up top, this is the one you take for your permanent residency. The LS version at the bottom, the shorter version, is the one for citizenship. And you'll notice that the price is quite different. So the longer test, it's basically twice as much info. It's 280 Canadian dollars plus tax versus the shorter LS test, which is 195 Canadian dollars plus tax. Okay, so this also is just a different way to look at the same information we just talked about. So again, we bolded just to really draw everyone's eye to the reason why you're taking the test. So the general is for PR status. The LS is for Canadian citizenship. Please do make sure you register for the correct version of this test online. It would be an absolute shame to take the wrong test and then have to redo it for the other purpose, okay? So make sure you know which one you're aiming for. And be aware too that the general test, the one that assesses all 4 areas, it's also accepted. The score there is accepted by many different professional organizations. So the Real Estate Council of BC is a common one out here in British Columbia, and the ICCRC also accepts the CELPIP. There are more as well listed on the website, but those are 2 fairly common ones that I can mention now. Okay, now I'm getting some questions about minimum points for permanent residency applications. Those are fantastic questions, but I have to say that I'm not the one to ask. I don't work for the government, and nor do I have a background knowledge of government policies. So I'd hate to even suggest what I last heard in case it's wrong. Sometimes this information will be updated. It changes from time to time, always at the decision of the government itself. So if you go to the Government of Canada website, or you can actually just log into the CELPIP homepage, which looks like this. This is the CELPIP.ca homepage. We have links on that page that will direct you to the government links where you can find answers to these questions. And keeping in mind too that a lot of people who immigrate to Canada have different purposes. So some of us are taking express entry, some of us are doing specific work programs. So the number of points you need for each specific program is different. So I'm not the resource on this to start listing them all. I don't even know them, okay? So I'm sorry that I can't answer more questions about that, but definitely the government website will give you the most up-to-date information. So please do check there, okay? Isabel's asking again about the 2 versions of this test with the general and LS. So yeah, if you are applying for citizenship, she's wondering, well, if I took the general test, would they accept that for citizenship? It's an interesting question. I don't see why they wouldn't, because you still have your listening and speaking scores, but you're also spending over $100 more to take the general, right? Perhaps you're asking about the number of times you have to take the test. So let's just clarify that for everyone. When you take for permanent residency, you have to take the general test. Later on, so is it 4 years, I think, later when you can apply for your Canadian citizenship, you have to take the test again. So at that time, you would take the LS version. You can't just use the score that you got on the general test and apply it again. All right, so I'm hoping that that covers all bases and everybody's pretty set on how that works. Very good questions to ask, okay? The scores, Riam is asking, are valid for 2 years. So whatever you score on the CELPIP, you can use that within a 2-year window to apply for either PR or Canadian citizenship. So make sure when you take the CELPIP, you've got your plan in action that you're actually going to be immigrating to Canada. Otherwise, you'll have to retake the test if your score should expire. So that's really good information to have. Thank you for asking. Okay, so the CELPIP test itself, I'll just run through maybe some of the features of our test that we're pleased with. First of all, it uses all Canadian accents. So you're going to be listening to instructions and audio passages on your test through a headset. And all the voices you're going to hear throughout that test are going to have Canadian accents. They will sound very much like what my accent sounds right now. Okay, I lived the first 3/4 of my life, I guess. I was born and raised in Ontario, north of Toronto by about 4 hours. And I've been out west in BC for about 16 years. So I've lived sort of almost on 2 sides of the country. My accent is very typical of what you would find in most parts of Canada. And that's helpful, I think, because when we travel to other parts of the world, I know you've encountered people who speak English in a variety of accents and dialects. And if you're listening to an accent for the first time, so I'll just use Ireland as my example. I've traveled a lot. And in Ireland, yes, they speak English, but I found the further north I went, the stronger the accent became. And I actually had a hard time understanding some people speaking in English just because our accents were so different. Okay, so you don't have to concern yourself with, being familiar with all these different types of accents before you take CELPIP. If you get accustomed to how the Canadian accent sounds, you'll be much more prepared for this test and you'll understand it hopefully quite well. Okay, and the same goes for vocabulary. So the vocabulary you encounter will be North American, if that helps. So you don't have to worry memorizing all sorts of different expressions from different parts of the world and so on. So it just gives you a focus, I think, as you're studying as well. Okay. So one of my viewers here, is it Vladilsav, I hope I pronounced your name correctly, is commenting on some accents in Canada, specifically in Newfoundland. You're absolutely correct. Out east, the maritime provinces, the little tiny provinces and islands out east, there are noticeably different accents there, but you will not hear them on the Canadian test, on the CELPIP test rather, okay? Yes, they're Canadian accents and that's fantastic, but you're right, they are a little bit unique and not typical of the country as a whole. So we wouldn't throw that at you on a test. We're going to have sort of the uniform accent to make it easier for all of you, okay? Wayne's wanting to know if we spell an American way, is that okay? And yes, you know what? American and Canadian spelling is similar, but there are a couple of differences. If you choose to spell the American way, it's okay, as long as you are consistent and use that spelling method all the way through the test. So please do not jump back and forth between Canadian and American, or British for that matter. Sometimes we have lots of British test takers, and it's fine to spell things the British, or if there even is a different way, or use the vocabulary, it's okay. You just have to be consistent and make sure all of your answers are using that one method, okay? That's the one piece of advice that I would give you there as well, okay? All right, let's keep going here. We've got lots of questions, so keep them coming in. You're going to keep my colleague Silver very busy today. I can see she's typing madly to try to answer all of these questions. The CELPIP testing centers, by the way, are offered throughout the world. We have many more, of course, in North America, simply because the test started right here in British Columbia, and it's grown through Canada and the States first. But it has expanded overseas over the past years. Now, unfortunately, COVID really threw a wrench in the plan of the company. We had plans to open yet more centers this year alone in different parts of the world, but COVID-19 has made us put some plans on hold as we wait out to see what's going to happen with the virus, okay? So once again, if you're waiting patiently for a test center near you to open, then we ask that you just be patient for a little while longer yet. It's really out of everyone's control. We have to wait and see what's happening in the world as time goes. Okay, so the way you're going to know if there is a testing center open near you is to go onto the CELPIP.ca homepage, like you see here, and where it says take the test at the top, you'll open up those ribbons, and we put a little orange box around it. So this is where you pull down the menu to show which test type you're going to take. So whether it's general or LS, you would then select your country, your region, and your city. So when you drop down the listings of the cities, it will show you which cities in your region are closest to you. and you're looking for the green availability seat buttons. Okay, if you see a green button, it means that there is space for that exact sitting. So it will show you the date and the time, so you get to select which one you want, and then you click register, you would pay your fees, and you are officially registered for the test. Okay, so right now the CELPIP test is only available in testing centers. We don't yet have a way to administer this test at home. Okay, we've started doing that with our CALE test, which is our academic test. We just started doing that 3 weeks ago, and it's working very well. So maybe someday we'll be able to do that with CELPIP, but as it stands right now, we don't yet have the technology in place. So if you're taking this test, it means you're going to a physical testing center. And the centers look pretty much like this. This is a picture of the Vancouver head office. Now, it was taken back in September of 2019, before COVID-19 started here. So in this picture, you can see everybody is sitting side by side. I want to reassure you that this is not the case right now anywhere in the world. Okay, the test centers that have reopened are observing correct social distancing. So there will be a minimum of 6 feet between you. So there will be empty workstations between each test taker. So you'll be safe that way. All the equipment is going to be sanitized before and after use, including the microphones. You are required to wear a mask while you're speaking. Right now, because of COVID, everybody has to go into this space wearing a mask. And I know that might be a little uncomfortable to wear throughout the entire test, but trust me when I say it's not going to affect the quality of your score. You can speak through the mask, and the microphone does still pick up your voice. Okay, we've been sure to test that out. And if you'd like to even try that at home with your cell phone. So maybe put on a mask and record your voice with your cell phone. So you'll see that at least we can understand the voice. Okay, nobody's going to lose points if the sound quality is a bit muffled. We can still hear you, so I do want to reassure. Okay, but you can see here in the pictures you're wearing that headset, and the headphones is what you're listening to. You can also control the volume, so it'll go louder, it'll go softer. It'll also block out noise from around the room too. So those are all sort of helpful features, I guess. The microphone is attached right to the headset. So that's how you record your spoken answers. And the rater who gives you the score is going to listen to the recording later, and they will give you a score for each of your responses that way. Okay, and in front of these people, we can't see it, but they do have a little computer monitor and a keyboard. And of course, that's how you're going to read and do your writing as well. Okay, okay. Now, I know some of you are saying that there aren't any test seatings right now in your area of the world. I think that what I would advise is to, on the website, there's a section right at the top that has a spot for you to subscribe to notifications when things do become available. If you're seeing that there still isn't a testing center near you, I would suggest that you get in contact with customer service. They might have some suggestions for you. It usually means you'd have to travel to the nearest center. And I know, again, with COVID, that might not be possible right now. So the situation is unique for everybody. As I say, I know it's frustrating and everyone's trying so hard to find a solution. So yeah, customer service might have some up-to-date info there. And this is specifically for Juan, I understand, in the Honduras as well, if you can't find something there. Okay. The scores on your test once you do take it, so hopefully you'll find somewhere and can take the test. Your score itself is going to be available in 5 calendar days. So you get your score very quickly. And the score report looks like this. I know this is small because we're looking at a screen here. But at the top, you're going to have your picture and your personal information. In the middle will say what date you took the test and where you took it, etc. The bottom, of course, is the important part for you. This is where it's going to show you your score for each of the areas in English that you were tested on. So for the general test, you've got all 4: listening, reading, writing, and speaking. So you'll have an individual score for each of those components of English. And it's very common for people to have different scores in different areas. So we're all stronger and weaker in different skill sets, right? So some of us might get, say, a level 9 on our listening and our writing and a level 8 in the reading and speaking, for example. So it doesn't necessarily mean you'll get the same score all the way across. The questions themselves are assessed individually. Okay, so that's what the score report would look like. And I wanted to talk about how things are scored. So this is a full description of the levels that are available for CELPIP. And I know, again, there are different companies who have different scoring methods. So CELPIP maybe is unique. It's different, I think, from the other ones maybe you've studied. CELPIP itself starts at the lowest end with an M for minimal. It just means that if somebody gets an M, they're literally just starting their language study. Okay, so they don't have a lot of skill set yet that we can assess. And as we climb all the way up that scale, by the time we get to level 12, that is the highest that anybody can achieve. And that indicates advanced proficiency, both at work and at home and in the community. Okay, so again, a lot of people I know tune in to sort of aim for that magical level 9. That seems to be very common for a lot of people pursuing PR. But there's no such thing as a pass and a fail, right? People want level 12, but it doesn't mean we need level 12 and so on. So again, you can look at the government website maybe to see how the scoring systems works there. Okay. So this test it's a long test. I mean, I have to prepare you realistically. It's done in one sitting. So you have 3 hours up to a maximum of 3.5 hours. But then you're finished. You go in, you finish the test, and you go out. You don't have to come back for the speaking interview or plan to come back another day. So as long, you work hard, you'll be tired, but at least you can relax. And according to this fun calendar, there's a party planned that night. So you can let loose and unwind, hopefully, after that's done as well. Okay. Some people are asking about retaking the test. So yes, if you don't get the score that you want the first time, you can certainly retake the test. You have to pay for it a second time though. So we want to make sure that people are understanding, where their areas of weakness are and studying and preparing first before they retake. I believe, I always get this wrong by one day. I believe it's either 4 or 5 days minimum that you could retake the test if you miss the score the first time. But again, I mean, realistically, if you wait 5 days and take it again, I don't see how your score is going to change. In that short amount of time, it seems unrealistic to put in the work to actually improve the skill set. Okay, unless you just had a terrible testing day and that's what it was. Whatever it is, certainly you can retake the test, but just be aware that you have to pay for it again each time. And that gets very expensive. So make sure you've got your skills where they need to be before you retry it. That would be my best professional advice, I think, for sure. Okay. All right. So this is just a quick summary of the benefits of taking a computer test. And I'll go through them really quickly because I see we've got so many questions here. I've already mentioned that the test is done in one sitting and the speaking is recorded into the microphone. So you don't have to meet a human examiner. The reading sections, the text is always visible to you on one side of your screen and the questions will be on the other. So you can just sort of navigate back and forth between them. So that's helpful. The writing section, I'll let you know, it has some very helpful editing tools. So it keeps track of the number of words you're writing, which is helpful because there is a minimum and maximum word count for the 2 writing pieces you'll produce. It also has a spell check. So let me clarify what that means. The spell checker on the CELPIP test is going to underline a word that the computer does not recognize. So it might suggest this word is wrong and underline it in red, but it's not going to fix it for you automatically. The computer will present a list of possible words that it thinks you might have meant instead. So it will be up to you to select the correct word from that list to correct your spelling. Okay, that's the way that the spell check works. There are editing tools too in the same way you'd expect to use on Microsoft Word. So you can underline and you can bold and you can cut and paste and copy. You don't have to, but I know some of us are just so used to editing our work with those tools that if you want to do that for your 2 written responses, then that's okay. It's not going to affect your score. It's more to do with making you comfortable as you're writing and perhaps saving you some time if you're moving ideas around and things, okay? The listening, I know I've mentioned we have a volume control, and at the top of your screens on the test, you're going to have a little countdown clock. So hopefully that will keep you on target so that you're able to answer all the questions in that section before your time is up. Once the timer hits 0 for a specific question, the test will just move on automatically. So it's really important to keep track of your time so you know how many questions you have left, that sort of thing. Okay. Let's get into the test information. This is the really important stuff. Actually, before I do that, let me quickly look at my questions to make sure that I haven't missed anything that Silver's not done. Oh, here's a good one. Sandeep, thank you for asking. So for the retaking of the test, if say of those 4 areas, like reading, writing, speaking, listening, if let's just say, for example, speaking was the one area that you scored a little bit low on, you can't just retake the speaking again. So this is the trade-off. You would actually have to redo the entire test. Okay, those 4 skills are always assessed together. And I know that's a lot of work, which is why we say make sure your skills are up to par, meaning as strong as you can get them before you take the test. Yeah, so you can't just redo the one, you have to take the whole test again, which is obviously quite a bit of work as well. Okay, so thanks for asking that. All right, let's move on to the listening section of the test. This is the very first part of the test anyway, so this is why we're starting here. Few things you need to know. The audio passages you're going to hear will only ever play once. So you can never pause and you can never rewind. So make sure your ear is trained very intently on what you're hearing. The questions you're going to answer will always come after the audio has played. So this is why we provide you with a notepad and pen, well, paper, I guess, and pen. So you're going to be able to listen and take notes as you listen. So I would suggest you practice writing down key ideas as you're listening to things at home, because you're going to use the notes you take to help you answer the questions later. That's really helpful. Okay, timers again will manage your time. And of all the listening tasks on the test, there are 6 of them. They're going to get progressively harder. So listening, the first question, part 1, is going to be probably the easiest, whereas part 6 at the end, you'll notice that the vocabulary level and maybe the critical thinking skills required there are going to be noticeably harder. That's the way the test is designed. So it can assess somebody who's working at a beginning, intermediate, or advanced level, all right? There are next buttons on every screen that you're going to see up in the top right-hand corner here. You can use them only when you're confident you're completed the entire section you've worked on and you're ready to move on. Once you select or once you click on next, you're going to move to the next screen, but there's no back button. So if you realize you made a mistake earlier, or if you realize, forgot to answer the last page of questions, for example, you can't go back. So your work is just submitted as it was and the test goes on, okay? So only use that next button when you're absolutely confident that everything you've answered is correct and complete. Okay, now you cannot take time from one section and add it to the next either. So looking here, I see 26 seconds remain on this question. If I choose my answer and hit next, that doesn't mean that I get to add on an extra 26 seconds later. That timer resets for each screen. So the only benefit of using next is, again, just to finish the whole test a little bit more quickly, I suppose, than you would otherwise, okay? Use it sparingly, if at all. Okay, the listening questions, there are 6 parts, and they are divided right down the middle in their structure. So parts 1 to 3, what's going to happen there is you'll hear the audio, and then when it's time to answer the questions, you're not going to actually read the question, you're going to hear it. So a voice is going to read the question out loud to you. You'll listen to that, and then you'll select the answer from the multiple choice menu, as you can see on the left. Okay, you'll have 1 question per screen as we go here. You can see this is an example from listening part 2, and you can see there are 5 questions here. It tells you question 1 of 5. So that's how you know how many more you have to answer. When you move on to parts 4 to 6 of the test, the format's a little bit different. You're still going to hear the audio first and only once, but the questions you answer this time, you're going to read to yourself, and they're all grouped together on the same screen there, as you can see. So you read the little, the starting of the question, and then you open the drop-down menu, and that's going to show you the multiple choice answers. So you just click on the answer you like, and it fills it in for you, and away you go. Okay, so listening is structured slightly differently, but the one thing that never changes is that you'll only ever hear the audio once, and you'll always hear it first before the questions are there. So that's why it's really important to take helpful notes, I think, as you're listening, so you can remember the details when it comes time to answer later. Now the speed, Adsarsh is asking a fantastic question that no one's ever asked before. The speed of the speech does not get faster as the listening passages go on. So when we say it gets harder, we mean the vocabulary will be noticeably more complicated and advanced, and perhaps even the type of question. So the critical thinking skills that you need to use to answer the question will likely be a little harder too. But the rate of speech, like the speed and the pace and the volume, all those things will be the same all the way through the test. Okay, so don't worry about that. That's a good question to ask, I think, for sure. The questions as well, Vishal, are only ever read out loud once. So you can't listen again. And I remind us of that frequently because sometimes, you know, we daydream. We all do it. Teachers do it too. Students do it. So if you're all of a sudden sitting in the test and wondering what you're going to cook for supper later that night, and then you realize you've missed the question, well, it's too late. We can't go back and hear it again. So you have to do everything you can to remain focused on what you're listening to. Just get through this listening section, and then you can daydream a bit more maybe. Okay, so good question. There are a couple of different listening passages that you need to prepare for. So the first one is a practice task, and I'll show you what that looks like in a moment. It's really simple. It's not even scored. You'll also hear conversations between possibly 2, even 3 people, and you'll also hear single speakers too. So there will be a variety of men and women's voices talking, either alone or with each other, okay? Now, the first thing you're going to see on the test, so you've sat down to take the CELPIP, and this is the first thing that comes on your screen. Up in the corner, it says listening practice task. So this is the only practice question on the whole test. And the reason why you would want to answer this is to make sure your equipment is working. So you're wearing your headset at this point, and you should be listening or hearing the question that's being read out loud to you. If you can't hear anything, now is the opportunity to raise your hand in the test center, and the test administrators will help you troubleshoot. You know, it might just be that your volume was really low and you can adjust the volume, something simple like that, we hope, okay? If there's a problem with your equipment, the test administrators will fix it or issue you a new one. So this is where you want to figure that out, okay? You'll also have an opportunity here to get rid of some nervous energy because you're starting a big, important test. It's very natural to feel nervous. We all feel that way, most of us do. So you've got 30 seconds on the timer up at the top. It gives you a moment to listen to a question, practice answering it, and just sort of take a deep breath and be confident that the rest of the test will go smoothly. Okay, so just practice. Nobody's going to ever read this over. It's not scored. It's just to get you familiar with the equipment and the test structure. Okay. When you officially start the test, you'll see in the top corner part 1. Now, this is actually a snippet from part 2. We don't have time to look at all parts today, as you might imagine, or we'd be here all day together. So this is a screenshot of what part 2 would look like. And part 2 is always listening to a daily life conversation. So you'll have a couple of people speaking. All right, now some of these conversations you'll hear might be complete in themselves, but I find a lot of them in the earlier parts of the test will be chunked into sections. So you might hear the first part of an audio, and then you'll answer some questions about what you heard, and then you'll hear the second part of the audio and answer some questions and so on. So that's a very common structure. All right, and there are definitely some things that you're going to want to listen for. So remember how I said you hear the audio first, and then you get the questions second. So what are you even going to take notes about? Do any of you have any ideas or suggestions that you'd like to share in the questions box? What type of information will you be listening for as you hear the people in this section talk? You know, like names maybe, but what else? Anybody want to suggest to get us thinking? So how would you even begin to take notes about this? So Adarsh and Deanna and, oh, so many, I can't even keep up here. Everybody's saying we have to know who's speaking, and I fully agree. So identify who the speakers are, listen for the context. So where are they? What is the situation, or is there a conflict even? What's the problem that they're trying to solve? If there are any dates or names, you can jot those down, but I think your keywords are crucial. So here's a nice summary list of what a lot of you just suggested. So who is always important. Now, I'm trying to think of all the practice tests that I've looked at. I don't remember hearing people's names too often, but you should identify their role. So looking at this picture in the background behind the green questions, can you try to even guess who these people are before you hear the audio? Who do they look like to you? I know it's a man and a woman, yes, but even more so than that, can we be specific? So yeah, some of you are saying this is a bus driver. You can see his hand on the wheel, and a passenger. So that's what I mean by like the speaker. So you might write that down on your sheet. Okay, I might even write down short forms. So for bus driver, I might put BD. And for passenger, I might write the word pass or something like that. You're writing short forms and keywords because you don't have a lot of time for sure. Okay, so I'm going to actually play an audio clip here from a past CELPIP test. So you can get a sense of what the level of difficulty is and what it sounds like. And as you're listening to this clip, can you please listen to the answers to these questions? So we already know who the speakers are. We've talked about that. But we want to figure out, do they know each other and what are they talking about? And what is the problem? So in other words, what is the discussion all about? And do they solve it? So after you've heard this audio clip, I'm going to ask you to help me quickly answer those questions. So let's see how we do together here.
Stop. Watch your step on the way out, ma'am.
Thanks, driver. Do you happen to know where the little kids' playground is? I know it's in the park somewhere. Too bad I forgot my smartphone.
There are a few playgrounds here. Do you mean the one next to the water fountain?
No, the one I'm thinking of is just beside the petting zoo. You know, where there's goats and rabbits?
Yeah, I know there's a petting zoo, but I don't know where it is exactly. Anyway, I'm pretty sure there's a children's playground over there past the restaurant. Maybe you could take a look over that way.
Okay, great. Sounds good. Thanks very much.
Okay, so that was part one of this audio. So we know this is a bus driver and a passenger. We figured that out just by the picture, and sometimes there might be some visual clues. Even if there was no picture, it was obvious, hopefully, to us what they were talking about. So they don't know each other. I'm going to say they're just strangers on the bus, but what are they talking about? Do you figure? Like how would you describe this? It's kind of like a challenge. It's kind of like the problem they're trying to solve. What's the main topic all about? Yeah, a lot of you are writing in. The woman specifically is asking for directions because she's lost, and the bus driver, she's hoping, will know the answer. So there were 3 places mentioned in this audio, and this is where it gets tricky. So I heard the bus driver mention the places, it was mentioned children's playground, petting zoo, and restaurant. So all 3 of those places were mentioned. You had to have listened carefully enough to figure out which one she's looking for. This is the whole point of her question. So of those 3, which is the one she's looking for specifically? Let's see if we can catch it. And if you're not sure, you'd have to guess. What is she looking for? Yeah, she's looking for the children's playground. That's right. So when she asked the driver, where's the playground? Does he know for sure? Does he give her a definite answer here? Does he solve the problem? Absolutely not. But he's got a pretty good guess, doesn't he? So he's trying to be helpful and say, I think it's near the children's playground or the restaurant or something like that. Okay, so he's trying to be helpful, but he doesn't know for sure. So the problem or the lack of directions here is not fully solved by the end of this conversation. We would have to hear the second piece. Okay, so here's an example of the second question in a series of 8 based on what we just heard. So I'm going to play the question. Remember, you hear somebody say it out loud. And once you've heard the question, can you please answer it for us? These 4 choices you see on the right-hand side for multiple choice. Let's pretend that they are labeled A, B, C, and D. So type in your letter guess when you've heard this question.
Question 2.
What best describes the driver's response?
Okay, so very quickly, please type in A, B, C, or D. We sort of already talked about this, but let's double check. And everybody has B, which is absolutely correct. He is making a guess, and he uses certain language as he speaks. I remember him saying, I'm pretty sure. So that tells me he doesn't know for sure. So answer D on the list, he doesn't show the way. He doesn't even know 100% that he's correct. But he says, I'm pretty sure. So he's making a guess. So that's basically how it works.
Question.
Okay, so you would, with your mouse, you would just click on the bubble that answers the question of your choice. And then you would move on. So up at the top there where you see the timer, this person answered just in time, and then the countdown clock, I guess, hit 0. So as soon as the timer hits 0, the computer is going to move automatically to the next question, and the the speaker's voice will play automatically. So you have to be focused and on, okay? If you're confident that B is the correct answer and you don't need the extra time, this is where you would click next. And again, as soon as you do that and move to the next screen, you're going to hear a voice say, question 3, and they'll read out loud the question, okay? You have no control over when the audio starts and finishes. As soon as the computer moves to the next screen and the next question, it's going to start automatically. So again, no time to daydream. You've got to really focus with your pen and your paper and take your notes as you can, okay? Now let's skip ahead a little bit to the latter part of the listening test. So part 5, there are 6, remember? Part 5 is always going to show you a little video as well as like hear the conversation. So it's kind of like watching a TV program in a sense here, I guess. It's a little bit longer, so that makes it a little more challenging. So the discussion between these 3 people, we're told, is between 1.5 to 2 minutes. Okay, so train your ear to catch what they're saying. And I think before the audio plays here, again, reading these instructions, you would hit next, and as soon as you do that, the audio will start playing and you'll be able to watch these people talking to each other. I would recommend that you try to suss out their facial expressions and body language and even posture. So sort of look at how their bodies are relating to try to determine some meaning about them. Now, we're not going to hear their conversation today because we simply don't have time, but just look at the fellow in the middle there, for example. Do you see how he's got his eyes turned downwards and he's clasping his hands in front of him? And he's even smirking a bit. He's not smiling, but he's got this, his lips are pursed together and his shoulders are slumped. So how is this man feeling, do you think? What is his role in this discussion, would you guess, based simply on the visual cue? How's he feeling in one emotion? Is he nervous? Is he excited? Is he angry? Where would you put him in the range of emotions here, just for fun? Yeah, a lot of you are saying he's disinterested, or maybe he just doesn't agree with them. He's not convinced. You know, maybe he's bored. Maybe he's tired and doesn't want to hear it, right? So all of these negative emotions that you're listing here are very accurate. So a lot of you have shared that, so thank you. The 2 people on the other side of him though, so the man and the woman on either end, do you notice how they're engaged in eye contact? And they're leaning in a little bit. And I see a pen and a clipboard in both of their hands. So that tells me that they are interested and engaged in what the other has to say. So this might be helpful later when you're asked a question. You could be asked something about, you know, whether they agree or whether they're working together. Something like that could be helpful. What about the setting? Where are these people? Maybe we should have started with that. So I see an open doorway with a hallway behind the woman, and I notice a plant in the corner and a coffee table with some textbooks maybe, I'm not sure. So where would you guess they probably are? Let's see what you have to say. A lot of you are saying some sort of office lounge or a conference room or a waiting area. And yeah, I would agree. They are certainly not at home. That's the takeaway here. It looks to me like they're having some sort of a meeting. Perhaps they're waiting for their team to come back, or they're having a conference at work. And you know, the work idea makes sense because look at the clothing. It's business casual. You know, the men are wearing collared shirts and the woman has a nice sweater with a skirt. So all of these cues, even though nothing's been spoken yet, at a quick glance, when you look at the picture or watch the video, you're hopefully making meaning out of what you're noticing too. Okay, and you're looking for the big picture items like the green ideas I just listed. You would never be tested on memory. Like there would never be a question like, you know, what color was the teapot, for example? That would never happen. All right, the teapot isn't even important in the scene. But the facial expressions, the clothing, the setting, all of those could give you some important clues later. Okay, the Gender's asking about study materials, and yes, our bookstore is full of them. I'm going to talk more about that at the end of today's session if you want to wait to then, or you could just click on to the bookstore website and read the descriptions there as well. Okay, pardon me. So when you are listening to a group of people speaking, you're often watching, like in that last example we just saw, you could look for visual clues. But sometimes in certain parts of the listening test, like in part 4, you're going to hear one single speaker talk to you, and they're usually an expert in their subject area. Maybe it's like a news report or something like that. So can we just stop for a minute to discuss what we can all do with our voices to convey meaning beyond just the words we choose to speak. Do you know what I mean? So when you're speaking out loud to a friend and you have something really important to say, what do you do with your voice itself to draw attention to the key words? Do you ever notice when you're speaking? In any language for that matter, I'm guessing. What do you do? Yeah. So Kanika is saying we usually raise the voice or make it louder like I just did. We emphasize that key word. So that's a clue to you. When you hear a speaker on this test talking, and there's one or two key words that you hear a bit louder than the others, I would probably write those words down. They're likely key words and are very important. Likewise, if they're repeated, if you hear the same words several times, well, it has to be important, or they maybe wouldn't have bothered repeating it so much, okay? And I'll show you some other ideas. Oftentimes we'll pause too for effect. Do you ever notice? So if a news reporter has two main ideas to share, very likely they'll pause for an extra second or two just before the first one, and then they'll keep going and they'll talk about the next one, and then they'll keep going, right? So listen for those pauses. That will help to chunk the information down as you're listening, and it will guide your note-taking, I think. They might be small, but they're really important. Okay, so we've talked about the clues at the top. So intonation is sort of your voice is going to go up, and we do that when we ask questions sometimes, but yes, we want to stress or make louder those important words. And once you've practiced with those verbal clues, I guess we'll call them, you can then start training your ear to pick out signal words. So this is the bottom part of your screen. So the main topic will always come at the beginning, otherwise we won't even understand what we're listening to. But for the key details, you might start recognizing transitions and signal words. So one of the more common ways that we learn as we're starting the language is sequencing words. Things like first of all, secondly, next, and then we get a bit more complex and we use words like additionally or consequently. So really focus in your ear for these conjunctions, transitions, or even joining words. They're going to help you identify when another idea is coming and when it's time to write that down on your notepad. Okay, and you'll also want to spend some time understanding the difference between facts and opinions. So facts are just statements that are true, but opinions are beliefs. And there are often signal words that will tell you an opinion is coming. So when you hear something like, the teacher believes that, or the firefighter supports the notion that, right? So these words like belief and support and think, these are all clues that tell you it's an opinion that belongs to one person. And that will be key in the final part of your listening test. You're going to have one person talk to you about the opinions of 2 or 3 others, and you have to keep track of whose opinion is whose. So listen in for those really important signal words that tell you when the opinion is being presented. Okay, and that's going to make sense when you actually start looking at the practice questions. You'll start to hear these and notice them for yourself. Okay, so I've mentioned many times by now that we really should be taking notes, I think, as we're listening on the CELPIP test. How do all of you out there take notes? It's very subjective, meaning there are many ways to do this and there's no one true right way. But what are some tips that maybe we can share as a group today to help the rest of us that are wondering? So for example, when I take notes, I write down short forms and initials. I never write the full word because it takes too long. So that's one strategy. Okay, Kanika is saying perhaps a table or chart. I agree. If you've got 2 different people's opinions, why not make a 2-column chart and then just start writing ideas down on the right side? That's fantastic. Okay. Cinderella, yes, you'll get a webinar recording for this. Don't worry. Okay, what else can you do for note taking? Arrows. Yes, somebody said let's use arrows. I use little dots or bullets, but something like that would help. Bullet forms. Yeah, Mikhail, you and I have the same idea. Let's have one more suggestion and then I'll share my list. Anybody else have an idea? We talked about verbal cues. Well, there's one really important one that I want to mention. So we've already looked at short forms, which are abbreviations and symbols. So if you're talking about money, I usually draw a dollar sign, stuff like that. It's the organization. So figure out how it works best for you to read your own notes. Nobody else is going to see your notes, so they're not being scored, but you have to read them to make sense of them. So I find the best way is just to start writing at the top of the page and just put every new line has a new idea. Just go right down, top to bottom. That's probably the easiest way. Some people like to draw diagrams in a circular fashion. If that works for you, great. But what I would advise you not to do is don't just randomly throw words all over your page. I've taught classes and I've seen students, write one word at the top, another word at the bottom, the next word they put on the left margin. And I mean, maybe that works for them. It wouldn't work for me. So you need to figure out a way that you can read your notes because you don't have a lot of time to take them and then to answer your questions. So organize them as you see fit, whatever is best for you. Okay, and we've got the rest of these ideas here. So we're point forming using arrows or bullets. You're putting down the main ideas, just a very short half of a word or a small phrase would be fine. If you happen to hear names or dates, I would note them down, just in case they come back in a question later, you never know. So it's not hard to write a person's name down if you hear it. Okay, use those verbal cues that we just talked about and focus on keywords. Keep them short and sweet. That's the expression we use. Keep them brief and simple as well. Okay, now you're going to be asked 3 different types of questions for both listening and reading for that matter. The first type is a general meaning question. And this is where you have to have knowledge or understanding of a part or a section of the audio in order to give an answer. And the answer is generally about the overall idea, like a theme, main ideas here, okay? The specific information questions are much more focused. So this is where you might pull out just 1 or 2 words from the audio. So this is where if you identified somebody's opinion, that's the type of question you might get here, the supporting details. Inference questions are a little more challenging because your answer will never be stated directly in the audio itself. It's going to be implied. So you're going to have to use your knowledge of everything you've heard. And then looking at the multiple choice answers, you're going to select the one that makes the best sense based on what you've learned. So here's one concrete example that I like to share. Let's pretend your question says, what was the author's purpose for talking to you here in this passage? So you would have to decide maybe if the author wanted to teach you something new, or maybe the author wanted to persuade you that their opinion was correct, or perhaps they even just wanted to entertain you. So using the entire piece that you've heard, you'd have to come up to that conclusion on your own. So that's what we mean by inference. And again, you will see a variety, all 3 of these types of questions asked on the listening and again on the reading sections of the test. So we need to get familiar with all of them. Okay, all right. Just to review what we've learned for listening, it is one of the longer parts, I guess, of the test. Well, I guess they're all almost the same. I'm close to an hour. For listening, the best thing I can say is focus on what you do understand, not what you don't. So because you only hear the audio once, please just, if there's a new word that you hear and don't understand, just ignore it and let it go. Keep your ear in present time and just keep going forward, noting the ideas that you do understand. You'll get much more value out of doing it that way. If you waste your entire listening time trying to determine what one word meant, I think you're going to miss out on the whole audio. So just focus on what you know. Don't worry about what you don't. That's the best you can do at this stage. Your notes are helpful. You'll want to definitely jot down the main points and any key details that jump out at you as you listen. Intonation and pausing is going to help you identify your ideas. And one thing I've not mentioned yet is paraphrasing ideas. I'm going to show you a good example of a paraphrase in the next section for reading. So quite often the answer choices will use different vocabulary from the audio passage you heard, but the words will mean the same. You just have to understand that those words are synonyms. Okay, so listen for those. Sometimes if you don't know the answer, just take a guess. You're never going to lose marks for guessing wrong. Okay, but if you leave it blank, well then you're not going to get the point. So if all else fails and you really don't know, try your best to narrow it down. So you have 4 answer choices possible. Oftentimes you can eliminate or ignore 1 or 2 answers that really don't make sense. So as maybe you can get it down to 2 possible choices and one of them is likely right, and then you can just guess. That's the best strategy at that point of the test if you're really not sure. And that goes for any of the multiple choice on the test itself. Okay. Okay, let's get into the reading, folks, or we won't finish our webinar today. So the reading has 4 different parts, and it will also take you close to an hour to finish. And I'll talk about these strategies here as we go, just to save some time. So this is what reading part 1 looks like. It's always some type of a correspondence, like a letter. And there are a couple strategies that are helpful, but I'm just going to quickly present one that might work for a lot of us, I'm hoping. Okay, the very first thing I would recommend anyone does is preview the screen. So I always look at my time first. To me, that would be so important. So you note exactly how many minutes that you have here. And I know this is really small, but I think up at the top, did we start with close to 17 or 18 minutes, if I'm not mistaken, for this part 1. So with that in mind, then, what the next thing you might want to do is skim the passage over. So I would you're not going to have time to read the whole thing from start to finish slowly, because you have 12 questions or so to answer. So if you were to just let your eyes quickly read through the first sentence of every single paragraph, that should give you just a general sense about what the reading passage is about. And that should take you no more than 30 seconds. That's how quickly you're going to skim through that text, because you want to focus your time on the reading questions. So looking at the reading questions, I always double check how many I have to answer, and I believe it's about 11 or 12, depending. Okay, so you're going to read the question itself, and then you're going to identify the keywords from that question and return to the reading passage on the left to scan through the passage to find the word. Once you locate the word in the passage, you can then hopefully answer the questions. So that's one technique. It's navigating back and forth between the questions on the right and then finding the keywords then back in the text on the left. And if you do that for every question, hopefully you'll finish it before your time is up. So if you've got about, say, 11 questions to answer and 17 minutes to complete the section, if you do a quick math check, that's going to give you just over a minute per question, you know. So you don't spend too much time on any one question. Either leave it and come back, or guess and then return later if you're running out of time. But always keep an eye on that timer. If you see 40 seconds left and you have 3 questions left to go, you better work fast. That's what that means. Because as soon as the timer hits 0, it's moving on with or without you. And you hate to leave anything blank, because you won't get any points for a blank answer. So just make sure everything's answered, even if you're guessing. That's one of the best things that I can recommend here as well. Okay. Okay, so reading as well, I won't say anything more about the types of questions because we've already talked about the types of questions. You will have general, specific, and inference questions here. But I'd like to show you what one of the reading questions from a past CELPIP test looks like. And this is certainly going to help you focus in on the skills you need. So this is the same reading letter or correspondence we saw earlier. It's just a little bit bigger on the screen. I know it's still tiny, but I'm hoping you can read it at home. We're going to focus on question 2. So question 2 here says, in a few weeks, Maria's son Marco will. So right away in that question, I'm hoping that you're identifying you need to determine something Marco is going to do. So you need to find Marco's name in the text. Okay, so really quickly, go back to the 2 paragraphs you can see on the left-hand side, please, right now. Let your eyes fall down the page until you see Marco's name. And quickly tell me which paragraph you see his name. Is it in paragraph 1 or paragraph 2? Or is it in both? Uh-oh, trick question. Marco's name is in both paragraphs. Do you see it? It's in the second line, and it's of the first paragraph and the first line of the second paragraph. So the next thing you need to do then is once you find his name, you have to slow down your reading and read the sentence with his name in it to see if it's telling you what he's going to do. In paragraph 1, it just talks about Marco's university graduation. That doesn't tell me what Marco's going to do, so that's not where my answer is. Let's not waste time on paragraph 1. Let's go right to paragraph 2. Aha, so this one, we bolded or highlighted in yellow. It says here, Marco broke the news that he had accepted a job offer in Tokyo. He leaves at the end of the month. So this is telling me something he's going to do. So with that in mind, can you all go back to the 4 multiple choice answers there and see if you can tell me which one is correct? Is it A, B, C, or D? What will Marco do you think? Yeah, everyone's answering correctly. Everybody is suggesting that the answer is C. He's going to start a new job, and you're absolutely correct. So if I return just for a minute to the yellow phrase highlighted, it says there that he broke the news, meaning he shared with us that he had accepted a job offer. So if he's accepting a job offer, it's clear to me that he's simply going to be starting a new job. So those words don't match up exactly, but the idea is the same. Okay, that's very common all the way through CELPIP. There's another really strong example of a paraphrase here. So in the question 2 itself, do you see where it starts with in a few weeks, Maria's son Marco will, blah, 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 blah. So in a few weeks, can we go back to the yellow highlighting, and can you please find for me 4 words in the yellow highlight that means the exact same thing as in a few weeks? Anybody see them? We're looking for a paraphrase. So in a few weeks is the same as, and everybody that is guessing is right, end of the month. Do you see that at the end of the yellow highlight? So this is what I mean when I say paraphrased. So if you weren't sure that the answer C was correct, you can match up those keywords from the question and the text. And now you're extra confident that yes, C is correct. And as soon as you click on the choice, the computer will insert the answer just like you see here in green letters, okay, into the sentence. Now later, if you want to change your mind, it's okay. You can just click on the word start a new job and the drop-down menu will open again. So you could change your answer if you wanted to later, but this is what it will look like once you've selected an answer. Okay. So when you are reading, again, just to recap, don't spend more than 40 seconds maximum skimming through that text. Don't read it all the way through slowly because you won't have time to answer the questions. You just want a general overview of what the text is about. So you're going to be going back and forth between reading the questions, identifying keywords, and finding those keywords, paraphrased or not, right in the text, okay? You can still eliminate incorrect answers. So if you're still not 100% certain, try to get rid of 1 or 2 answer choices that you know to be wrong and stick with, and you can guess. If worse comes to worse, you can guess. Okay, so make sure everything is answered before that timer hits 0. Now, if you do finish ahead of time with a minute or 2 to spare, I always like to double check my answers. That's what I would do. I would read all of my answers top to bottom if I have time and make sure I'm happy with it. Okay, if you've done that and you're very confident, then I suppose you could click the next button and you'd move right on into the writing section of the test, which comes next here. Now for writing, you have 2 tasks to complete, but you have about an hour or so to complete them. So I will let you know right now that if you need a bathroom break on the test, remember it said, was it 3 hours or 3.5 hours? This is the time to do so. So as soon as you get into your first writing question, you've got about 30 minutes or 35 minutes, I think it is, to complete the entire written piece. So the countdown clock will not stop, but if you're quick, if you raise your hand, the test administrator will escort you to the facilities, the washroom. And as long as you're no more than a few minutes and you can finish your writing piece, then you should be okay. All right, so again, this is really the only chance in the test that you have a big chunk of time where you can afford a couple of minutes if you need the bathroom. That's just a tip, because I know myself, I'm almost always needing the restroom. 3 hours is a long time. So for me, that's what I would be aiming for. So at least you know. Okay, there is no break. No, there isn't. And that's why I mentioned, some of you are a bit surprised. There is no official break in the test as of yet. Okay, the clock will not stop. So this is your chance to use the washroom if you need it. As long as you're quick, it will only take you a couple minutes, we hope, and that sort of thing. Yeah, so again, just to reiterate, some of you are still not clear. When you leave the room to use the washroom, the countdown clock still goes. So it starts at 35 minutes for writing and it will count down. So it doesn't stop. So just be aware of that. In other words, use the facility very quickly and come right back to your test. Okay. So let's get right into the test here, so we're not too long on the webinar. Just like before, you've got your countdown timer right up there at the top. And you've also got your background information over here. So for the writing, there's a bit more reading for you to do because you have to understand your background context before you can even pen your letter. So task 1 is always writing an email. So this is an example from a past test, and I'll just quickly summarize the background. It says that you recently made reservations for dinner at a very expensive restaurant, but the meal and the service were terrible. And the restaurant manager wasn't even there, so nothing was fixed for you, and you left very unhappy. Okay, so you're going to read that through first. Over here on the right-hand side, actually above in the blue, it tells you that you're writing an email to the restaurant's manager. You always have 150 to 200 words to write. So that's the word count you're aiming for. And then you're going to be given 3 or sometimes 4 bulleted points. And you need to make sure that you include all of those points within your email. That's how you're going to maximize your score. So for this exact situation from a past CELPIP test, the writers had to first of all identify the problems with the food that was ordered. So in your email, you want to be specific here. So one little small paragraph of the email should give at least, I would say, 3 details about the food. So base this on your own experience. I'm going to suggest that most of us have probably had a terrible meal somewhere along the way at a restaurant or maybe even at home. Don't tell your mom or your wife or your husband. And if not, you can make it up. You know, what could possibly go wrong with the food? So you might say, you know, my garlic toast was moldy. The pasta was undercooked, and my son's potatoes were stone cold, for example. So you want to be very specific about what you ordered and what was wrong with the food. You're talking about that within one little paragraph of your email. And then you notice the second point says complain about the service. Well, this is your second little paragraph in the email. You should be separating them into separate paragraphs. That's how we write. So think what possibly could be wrong with the service. Make these details up. Be creative but realistic. So maybe the server took 20 minutes to get to your restaurant. He threw the silverware down on the table and he yelled at you to speak louder, perhaps. I don't know. Okay, come up with usually 3 specific details will really support your details well. So that makes up the bulk of your answer, and we call that the body part of the email. You have to finish your email by describing what you want done. So this is the 3rd bulleted point. It says, what do you want the restaurant to do to fix the problem? So come up with a logical solution. You know, do you want your money back? Do you want a gift card? Do you want an apology? So you have to suggest one way you want the problem resolved within the email itself. Okay, so your tone, by the way, has to be polite and respectful. Even though we're complaining, it's not an excuse to be rude and angry in the letter or in the email. If you're rude and angry sounding in the language you choose, you're going to lose marks overall under your task fulfillment. So find a way to express yourself firmly and confidently, but there's no need to be rude, okay? I need to emphasize that very clearly. While you're writing out your email, you're doing so right here on the writing area of the screen with the keyboard in front of you. And there is a word count visible. So as you're typing away, you'll see the word count at the bottom of the screen, and that's how you're going to know when you're in the right word limit. Now, the instructions tell you 150 to 200 words. You actually have what we call a 10% leeway. So provided you're no more than 10% over or under, you're still okay. So you could effectively write 135 words to 220 words, and they won't penalize you for the word count yet. That being said, though, if your response is only 135 words, you're probably not putting in as much detail as you should. So that word limit is there for a reason. 150 to 200 is what it should take to really get your details out about the situation. Okay. Now, Liliana is asking a great question about the marking. So the speaking and writing components are indeed marked by a human rater, a human examiner. So not just one person, several people will mark your written response, you know, and give you a score on that, and the scores will correlate, and that's what you end up with for that piece, okay? The listening, reading, those are multiple choice, so those are marked by the computer because it's either right or it's wrong, so those ones are easier to mark in that sense. But yeah, the productive skills of writing and speaking are going to be scored by several different raters, never one. We would never have one person give you a score and call it a day. That's not, well, not fair. It's not professional, right? We always have multiple raters looking at any one piece anonymously, and that's how we can support the validity of the score too. Okay, excellent question. Thank you for asking that. Your email, by the way, I already addressed this, so just to summarize, your email shouldn't be rude. It shouldn't be overly formal. You know, you're not addressing the queen of the country or the prime minister of the country, but at the same time, you're still writing, in this case, to a restaurant manager, and it's probably someone you've never met. So you can't just use very colloquial, idiomatic, slang, friendly terms like you might if it was a friend. So please don't say, hey there, how are you doing? You know, that would be inappropriate for this email. So you want it to be kind of in the middle. So maybe, you know, dear restaurant manager might be an appropriate opening, and go from there. You know, I would sincerely like to request that you offer me a refund for the poorly served meal I experienced, and things like this. So your writing would be in the middle, not too formal, not too informal. Okay, your second written response is going to be an opinion survey, not an email specifically, it's an opinion survey. So if you look on the left-hand side here, this is again just a good example from a past CELPIP test. This one told you that you lived in a small town of 10,000 people. There was a large green area in the middle of the town that the city wants to know what they should do with. So they're sending out an opinion survey to you and everyone who lives there for your opinion. Okay, that's your background. On the right-hand side, up at the top, you see it says choose the option that you prefer. And those two options are always given to you. You're not making them up. So you can see here option A and option B. You have to select one of those by clicking with your mouse right in the little round bullet there. Okay, don't make up your own answer because you won't score well. It has to be one or the other. So this test says, do you want the green space to be turned into a shopping complex or a recreational park? And then they list a couple of details there to get you started with your thinking. So for this task, that's the easy part, picking the one you think is the best. So click and you're done. The hard part is when you write the response itself, you have to explain, of course, why your choice is the best one. So that's the whole point of this. It's giving your opinion in a confident way that will persuade the city to agree that your choice is valid. Okay, and again, you want to be specific. So if this were my answer, truthfully, I would have selected answer B. I like the idea of having a recreational park. So in your opening, you can get right to it. You don't have to spend your time with a really huge intro. Just get right to it. You know, I think the green space would be best served as a recreational park. There, that's my opening, that's my topic sentence. And then you're going to come up with, take maybe a minute to think about 2 or 3 reasons why. So for me, I would think of physical activity, I would think of social interaction, and what else could we say? Let's just go with those for time. Okay, so maybe those are my 2. So I can see my response in my head shaping up. I'm going to have 2 little body paragraphs to each explain how physical activity will be granted through the park. So just think about it logically. If you were to go to a park, how would you get some physical exercise, and then how would that help the body? So I might go on at length about how we could run around a track, we could walk through the trails in the park with a friend. That would increase our cardiovascular activity, which is good for heart health, and so on. So you've got 2 or 3 key ways that the physical activity is going to increase your health. And then you would do likewise for the social interaction. So list 2 or 3 ways you could interact with each other and how that's going to be beneficial. Okay, so that's what I mean when I say specifically support your idea here as well. Okay, makes sense so far? All right, let's carry on then. Oh, and one more thing about these surveys. Some people do write this as an email. I think just because you've just finished the email for task 1, if you want to write this as an email for the survey as well, it's okay. You're not going to lose points, but you're not going to gain points either. I think this one is best served if you get right to it in paragraph form. So introduce your choice at the beginning and explain 2 or 3 reasons why you feel that way, and then use the rest of the written time to develop those into paragraph form. Okay, with the correct tone as well. So this goes back to what I think it was Liliana was asking earlier about the markings. So hopefully a lot of you know by now the way that the scores are marked. If not, here goes. There are 4 different categories. We call them dimensions. that the raters are reading through to see if you've done in each of your written responses. So the first thing they're going to look for is content. So you need to make sure that your ideas are organized. So that means in proper, proper paragraphs and developed. So for each main idea you present, like for mine, physical activity is the main idea. Did you develop that? Did you give 2 or 3 examples of how physical activity is done and how it's good for health? That's what we mean by developing that, okay? And then you're looking at transition words to connect ideas together and even paragraphs too. That's what coherence is. It's the organization and ordering of the details. Your vocabulary is the second thing that's really important. So clearly you want to show off your best vocabulary, but you need to make sure that the vocab words are suitable. And I say that with all seriousness because sometimes I do see students from my own past classrooms or even on the CELPIP test. It seems to me like they're just memorizing these big, long, complicated words and throwing them into their response with the hopes that they're impressing the rater. That is not going to work. The words that you choose have to be there for a reason. They have to suit the response and be precise and accurate in the way they're being used. Okay, so certainly if you know some complicated and sophisticated vocabulary words, great, use them. Just make sure that you're using them correctly. If you're using collocations where we have phrases in English, get all of the words correct that collocation requires and include that in the answer, okay? Try your best to vary the words too. Some of the lower level responses tend to repeat similar words over and over, especially through connections. So we see a lot of and blah, 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 and da, 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 da. We don't want to always start sentences the same and so on. You get the idea. Readability comes down to literally how easy it is to read your work. Are you paragraphing the ideas so we know where each main idea is being presented? Are you starting sentences with a capital and finishing with an end punctuation? Please do not write your responses all in capital letters. Some people do that, and if you've never tried it, trust me, read something all in capitals and it will hurt your eyes. It's really hard to read, and it also makes you sound like you're angry. So please don't do that. Okay, you want your response to be as easy as possible to read through for the rater that's giving you the score. And task fulfillment is a kind of a combination of everything. It looks at how fully and completely you've answered the question. Have you followed the instructions? And also, have you met the word requirement? So you didn't go very far over or very far under that word count of 150 to 200. Okay, and at least 4 different raters are going to be looking at your 2 responses together. All right, they're anonymous. So, if I'm a rater marking your task 1 and my colleague Silver is also marking your task 1, I don't know she's marking your paper. I just put my score down and she puts hers and so on. So the raters are trained professionally so that the levels in theory are supposed to match up and they're close. So when you get 4 people all saying with certainty, this is a level 9, for example, that is the score that is awarded to your page. That's how the scoring system works. Now your overall score is going to be an average. So remember, you have 2 different written responses to provide. They're each going to be scored separately. So maybe you got a level 7 on one and a level 9 on the second. Then those 2 levels are going to be averaged together. So on your score report, you would then, in that example, end up with a level 8 overall for writing, correct? Right? Because you'd be averaging the scores together. That's sort of there. Did I do my math right? I think I did. So that's how the scores come to be. And it's just so important that everybody knows how they're being scored, right? We can't study and prepare for a test when we have no idea what skill sets we're supposed to be demonstrating. So we have lots of information and examples of these score descriptions on our website. So I'm hoping you're taking advantage of that if you've got more questions too. Okay, let's just wrap up. We're good for time. We have about 7 minutes left here to talk about our speaking, and I know we can get this done, hopefully without going too far over. Your speaking section is the last part of your test. It's the shortest for time. You've got about 20 minutes, but you also have 8 tasks to complete. So they are going to go very, very quickly. So this is an example of what one of the 8 tasks look like. For task 2, you're always talking about a personal experience. And I'll draw your attention to the instructions on the page here. They tell you is specifically who you're supposed to talk to. So always make sure you know that. This one says, or sorry, not talk to, talk about. This one says you're talking about a fun time you had with a family member or friend. So you have to talk about that. So decide very quickly in your head which one person you're choosing to speak about. If you can't think of a fun time with someone, the computer is suggesting some options. So you see, maybe you can talk about, party, something at school, a vacation, or anything else. So you decide. You notice at the top there, you've got 30 seconds to prepare. So 30 seconds to read this question and decide very quickly who the story will be about and what event. So me, I would definitely pick vacation because I've done a lot of traveling and that's easiest for me to remember. The most detail from your response will come from that last question. What happened and why was it memorable? So on your notepad in your 30-second prep time, you might just want to take a couple of quick notes to jot down where you, if you were doing vacation, where you went, when you went, what activities you did and why you enjoyed it, that sort of thing. So you can certainly use an example from, you can certainly use a suggestion that the computer is making if you want to do that to talk about, or you can invent your own. You know what, the story you tell, frankly, doesn't even have to be a real one. If you just want to make something up, you can. The raters are never going to know the difference as long as it answers the question. So you'll maximize your score by being as specific in your details as possible. And note, since this is supposed to be an experience that happened, you'll be talking in the past tense, right? Something that happened to you for sure. Let's spend just a moment talking about task 3, because this is a very different type of task where you're describing a scene. So you'll be shown this little image and asked to talk about what's happening. And you're talking to a person who can't see the picture. So please set this up with an overview. You might say, I'm looking at an image of a classroom full of elementary school students. Something like that would work as your overview. And then you're going to select, you have up in the top 30 seconds to decide which parts of the image you think are most interesting to talk about. And you'll be speaking for a full minute. So I recommend maybe picking 4 different parts of this image and do them in an order that makes sense. So you might start by describing what the 2 boys at the front are doing. So do you see them on the chalkboard? You might say, there are 2 boys helping each other with a multiplication question on the chalkboard at the front of the class. Okay, so I'm talking about what they're doing, and then you might want to describe what they're wearing and what they look like. You're trying to be descriptive. The blonde boy is pointing to the answer while the redheaded kid is doing the calculations, things like this. So you're working your way through the problem, or the image rather, in order to describe it in as much detail as you possibly can. Okay, now Zoran's wondering about other people talking at the same time. The headsets themselves are pretty good noise cancellation devices. You might be aware that others are talking, but it shouldn't really interfere with your concentration because you're speaking too. So you're going to be hearing your own voice, right? It would be similar to going to, say, a coffee shop and reading your book. Most of us can tune out the background noise to concentrate or to work on our laptop, okay? Also, I guess right now with COVID, because we're socially distanced, people are further away from you anyway, so it's even less of an issue. So I wouldn't worry too much about that, okay? Now, Adarsh is asking, can we name the boys? I would say no, I wouldn't. If this was a creative writing piece, then definitely, but you're just describing what's happening in the picture. So unless somebody had a name tag on, you probably wouldn't want to just invent a name. So I would just say there are 2 grade 4 students, you could say, or 2 young boys helping each other out, 2 classmates, something like that would be a little bit better, okay? Task 5, I just wanted to finish up with because it's a little bit unique. It's the only part of this test that has 2 parts to it. So what you're looking at right now is actually both parts. On the test itself, you're only going to see the one screen at a time. So you'll start with the left-hand screen, where you see, looks like some townhouses or row houses and a family home with the blue sky. So you're going to select the image that you think is the better family home. The instructions will tell you, you're looking for a family home. In this case, pick the one you think is better. So you pick that one. When you go to part 2 of the task, whichever image you've selected, in this case, I guess it was the family home there, the detached family home, I think you call it, your family member will present a new home in this case again, which is a little red cottage. So you have a little bit of time to prepare your answer, and then you're going to speak as if you're talking to the family member to persuade them that your selection is better. So you do have some information that you can speak about underneath the picture, but a lot you can also extend those with your own ideas. So the whole point of this is just comparing two different objects and then persuading somebody that your opinion is valid. Okay, this one is about family homes. There are many other. We do one in our webinar where they have to pick between two different types of fans for the house and on. So there will always be two items from the same class or classification to describe. And again, for your scoring here, you have at least 3 different raters are going to listen to your 8 responses, give a score. The scoring is almost the same as the writing. So the content coherence, the vocabulary, and the task fulfillment are pretty much the same. The big difference, of course, is we can't read your work because you're speaking, you're not writing. So we call the third dimension listenability. So as you're speaking, the raters need to make sure they can understand your pronunciation. They want to see if your rhythm is natural and fluent. So is your voice showing intonation? And are you pausing between main ideas for a moment or two to sort of organize that response? Okay, now we don't want to pause for too long. If you have 10 seconds where you're saying nothing, that's going to really interrupt the flow. So we don't want to interject. We don't want to say all the way through. We want to try to aim for a smooth delivery from start to finish. And we all know that takes practice. Boy, does that take practice, especially if English is not your first language. So this is why we do these webinars and have study sessions, hopefully, that you're doing at home before you take the test, okay? Task fulfillment, by the way, for here, you don't have a word count. The timer has to do with the length of time you fill. So if you're speaking for 60 seconds, you want to get close to the 60 seconds. If you finish really early, if you finish in 30 seconds, it's going to negatively affect the score there. Okay, now remember, you've got 8 different tasks to do. Each task will be given its own leveled score. And it's very common for most of us to score differently on the different tasks. I don't know if I've ever seen somebody get the same level for all 8 tasks because the tasks are so different. Sometimes you're describing, sometimes you're persuading, sometimes you're giving an opinion, and we all have different strengths and weaknesses. So please keep that in mind. You might excel, you might do really well on some of the tasks. You might get higher leveled scores there. There might be 1 or 2 areas that are a little harder for you and your leveled score is a little bit lower. So because all 8 scores are averaged together, that's going to help. So if you do poorly on just one question, it's not going to, hopefully anyway, drastically affect your score to the point where you're dropping all these levels. So I wanted to reassure you with that in mind, okay? It's a very complicated process, but it makes sense when we look at it that way. And we did it. We did our webinar in an hour and a half, even with all of your wonderful questions. So thank you for that. It's so hard to get through this. We have so much information. I'm just going to run through some of our test preparation materials. I will stay behind for a few minutes after I finish that to answer any last minute questions by typing with you, okay? So if you've seen this webinar before and you want to go now, that's okay. You will receive a webinar link recording anyway, so you can catch up on the prep review. But yeah, I'm just going to mention some of the materials that I highlighted earlier. So now that you've seen this webinar, I'm hoping you're going to go into our website and register for some other free webinars. They are all free. So we have several for speaking and several for writing. Okay, we've divided the webinars themselves for these 2 skills into 2 separate levels. So we have one series for both speaking and writing that target level 5. So this is beneficial for people who are working at maybe a high beginner level, who are looking maybe for Canadian citizenship and other programs. Even if you're aiming for level 9, you can still take the level 5. You're still going to see sample responses. We're going to listen to and read through many sample responses at these levels given by past test takers. And we'll talk about why they earned a level 5 and what they could do to earn a higher score and things like that. We do the same with our level 9 series, and those are really popular. In fact, for the speaking, I'm the one that delivers those, and we have so much information. We've divided that into two different webinars. Sorry, my colleague Megan delivers the first part, so she's going to take us through tasks 1 to 4, and we'll look at all sorts of sample responses and talk about why it's a level 9 or not. And then I will finish with tasks 5 to 8. So again, you'll hear many samples given by real test takers. Super helpful. And likewise with the writing, we have 1 2-hour webinar there where Megan takes you through both tasks. She does a fantastic job of talking about what is expected and looking at samples and so on. So please do check those out if you haven't already. I mentioned these free tests earlier. You can access them right on the website. We now call them the starter set. So there are 2 free tests. They do include answer keys for listening and reading. So you can answer the questions and check right away to see if you're right. There are listening transcripts too, so you can listen first and then read through the transcript to double check your understanding, and that's helpful. We don't yet have a way to give you individual feedback on your speaking and writing, but you do have the complete performance standards. So those marking criteria that we looked at, you have included there. So when you've written your piece, you can sort of go through that or work with a prep provider or a tutor or somebody who knows English really well and identify some of your strengths and weaknesses as best you can. So those are all free, and we welcome you to use them to your benefit. If you want more practice tests after you've done those 2, you can certainly purchase more. So we have 7 sets available in the bookstore, and each set contains 2 practice tests. So we have in total 14 tests altogether. Note that the first 7 sets are for the general test, and the last 7 are for the LS test. So please make sure you're purchasing the correct ones. Otherwise, you'll be out of luck, I guess. We have an Accelerate program as well, and that's the middle one here. This is actually my favorite study material because it's very well-rounded. It's self-directed, so you don't have access to a live teacher, perhaps like what we're doing here now, but you can click on to whatever you want to study. You decide. You can do reading, you can do writing. There are tons of pre-recorded videos of us. You'll hear probably my voice in there somewhere, and Megan and other people narrating and explaining how you're supposed to answer the question and taking you through the strategies. There are quizzes to test your knowledge and so on. You've got an analysis of sample responses yet again, and you're going to have a complete practice test included for each of the skills. So if you're looking to buy just 1 practice test, why not spend the money on the Accelerate program? And you're getting a practice test included anyway. That would be my advice. Okay, and my understanding is too, I hope I'm right in this, when you register formally for a test, I believe it is, you're now being given 5 free hours of the Accelerate program. It's kind of like a little promotion that we have. You have to, I believe you have to actually register for a test first. So don't quote me on that, check with customer service. But that is the idea, just to give you a little taste of what the program's like. And if you like it enough, you can then purchase it for the rest, okay? We do have another series at the end called the Practice and Analysis. So if you enjoy doing sample response analysis, this is a very good series for you. It's framed around 1 complete practice test. So it will take you beginning to end through all 4 reading, speaking, listening, writing sections and looking at questions and answers for each of those. We can't offer any print books right now, and we won't for some time, not until COVID goes away. So unfortunately, we cannot offer you the vocabulary book, but we do have the 2 side ones available. So that Reading Your Way book on the left, it doesn't necessarily prepare specifically for CELPIP. What it does is it improves your reading. It's popular with a lot of our test takers and even teachers and ESL students because they're improving their reading and comprehension by learning about Canada's history. So it's all having to do, and the grammar and vocab and essays included in there. You'll be learning about Canada too, if that's of interest to you. You can buy that as an ebook form right now. And on the right-hand side, we have a CELPIP error book, which is also quite popular. It walks through the 15 most common grammar errors. We've got other types of errors, CELPIP test errors, and so on. So it'll help you correct any commonly made errors. Good for anyone studying English, not just for the CELPIP test, but certainly you could use it if you are taking CELPIP. Okay, and last but not least, we have some study guides here as well. So if you're the type, it's an ebook, it's the version you would have to purchase, not the print. The study guide would be more comparable to say to what you would, if you were to take an English class and the teacher gave you sort of the main textbook for the class with all sorts of practice activities and such to do. That's more on par with what the study guide is for. It's not quite as tech savvy, so you don't have all the video. In fact, it is an ebook. Trying to remember, you don't have all the videos and things that you would in the Accelerate anyway. Okay, and I'll leave us with that. I won't even get into CALE. CALE is an academic test, so if you're interested in that, you can join on for our CALE Get the Facts webinar. But I will leave you there. That was a long webinar, folks. Sorry for keeping you a bit late. Our YouTube channel I mentioned at the beginning of the session is in blue print at the bottom. So this is the one where we're providing new content and some language tips and some response analysis that you've not seen before. Okay, so I just recorded one there today for task 8. So you can check that out where we talk about descriptive language use and so on. Otherwise, you can certainly follow us on Facebook, Twitter. I know we have an Instagram, all those social media platforms. We certainly have our email address up here on the screen. That's the 3rd line down. That's where you'd probably want to go for questions to customer service. They're super quick to get back to you, and you don't have to worry about time zones and things with the phone number. So the email's probably the best. Okay, so I'm going to mute my microphone, but I will stay behind for just a few minutes more to see if I can type some answers with you in the questions box. Thank you so much, Silver, for helping us out today. You were so busy, and I can see we still have questions that are not answered, so I'll help you out. Thanks, everybody, for your wonderful participation and all of your great questions as well. I'm hoping that you've learned a little more about the CELPIP test and structure so that it'll help you study. And good luck to anyone who has an upcoming test, okay? Hopefully we will see you for our next webinar. Check us out then. I will see you soon. This is Brandy saying thanks for joining, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.